It is a tough time to be a white-tailed deer. Food is starting to get scarce, and we just got 14 inches of snow here in Missouri, which is pretty ridiculous. Unless you have a well-managed, long-established late-season food source, deer are going to be hard-pressed to find some good food. And that is why many people turn to supplemental feeding programs to get deer through those harsh late winter months until spring rolls around and things start growing again. But there is a lot to consider before you just go out there and dump a big pile of corn. So in this video, we're going to talk about what you should feed deer if you decide to start a supplemental feeding program on your property, as well as some things that you need to look out for. But before we get into it, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And the first thing you need to think about before you throw out some food is you need to check your local regulations. I'm going to assume that most of you out there have heard of chronic wasting disease. In states where this disease has reared its ugly head, there have been a lot of regulations put in place to try to curb its spread. Now, whether you agree with them or not, they are still regulations, and if you ignore them, you could end up on the wrong side of the law. Always check your local regulations before you put out anything like mineral sites or feeders. These kind of things concentrate deer into small areas and could contribute to the spread of chronic wasting disease. If you're in an area that bans mineral sites or feeders, there's really not anything you could do to provide food to deer right now. Well, there's not anything you can do legally. You have to plan ahead to provide deer with some kind of woody browse or late season food sources for next year. Don't risk a fine or worse. And the next thing you have to consider is what exactly it is you're feeding them. Natural deer browse this time of year mostly consists of woody browse like saplings and other early successional growth. The supplemental feed that you put out needs to closely match the nutritional value as much as you can. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people will just throw out a big pile of plain old corn, and while it is high in carbohydrates, it is very low in fiber. Deer that gorge themselves on food they don't typically find in mass quantities can develop what's called acidosis. This disease develops when deer can't digest their food properly. This leads to the destruction of their digestive system, which can lead to dehydration, which, is kind of fatal. Now, corn can be used if it's introduced properly, but it's really not the healthiest thing out there for them. Think of it like this. If you're hungry, a bag of chips might hold you over till you can get something a little more substantial. But if your diet consists almost entirely of Doritos, you're probably not going to be a very healthy person. You're going to look and feel like crap. The supplemental feed you put out should closely match natural browse. This comes out to about 20% protein, 10% fiber, and 10% fat. The feed should also have some trace minerals in it like calcium and phosphorus. By paying attention to what's in the feed that you put out, you can almost eliminate the biggest concerns of supplemental feeding this time of year. And the third thing you should consider when throwing out supplemental food is how much of it you're putting out at any given time. Like I said earlier, piles of corn aren't necessarily always a bad thing. You just have to introduce them slowly so the deer's bodies can adjust to this new type of food. Even with these specially designed feeds, you want to introduce it gradually. Start out by, putting a small pile out and gradually increasing it over the next few weeks. Feeding this way won't have a negative impact on the deer's digestive system, but it probably would have a negative impact on you unless you live on the property that you hunt on. It could probably become a huge pain if you have to drive any kind of distance to have to refill these little piles every few days. That's where a good feeder comes in handy because you could set how much and how often that it puts out of any of that kind of feed. Plus, it's probably not a good idea to be, stomping around your woods every few days. Supplemental feeding can be just what your herd needs to come out on the other side of the harshest part of the year fit and healthy. Or it could just be a nice pile of poison. It all just depends on how much and what you're feeding them. If you have any more tips or recommendations on supplemental feeding, leave those down in the comments below. Hit that like button if you like this video, share it if you found it helpful, and make sure that you are subscribed so you can stay informed.